The New Orleans Saints have a reputation for surprise signings, and wide receiver Davante Adams could be their next. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints aren't just hiring new coaches, they're restructuring their coaching staff, and they've stacked a couple of W's along the way. Jamal Williams is no longer a New Orleans Saint, which makes running back and a running back addition this offseason all the more likely. We're going to lead everything off with why Davante Adams, former New York Jets wide receiver now, could be the Saints' surprise signing this offseason. We appreciate you very much as always, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Davante Adams could be the New Orleans Saints' next shocking NFL offseason signing. They do this, it feels like, every year, make some kind of big signing that no one thinks that they're going to be able to make because they start every offseason with, an overage in terms of cap value and all these other things, but then they always find some way to bring in some big name. And what we heard from Mickey Loomis, who looked us in the face and said that they were going to be more active this offseason than they were last offseason, I don't feel like a Davante Adams addition is one that we should rule out. I do think that it takes a little bit of a recalibration of thought, though. A lot of us, myself included, believe that the Saints would be better off effectively taking their medicine this year and then looking towards their future. That's easy to say when you don't have to look players in the face, though, and say, hey, we're not competing this year, right? The New Orleans Saints, however, have shown so far, at least in word and practice, or in word and then starting to show us in practice, that they intend to compete, that they intend to be a team that is not taking a step back in order to try to take a step forward later, that they want to go out there and compete. And so if we recalibrate that function, because it no longer matters what we think they should do, because we now know what it is that they intend to do. So as long as that's not just public line versus what it is they actually intend to do in practice, and I think the retention of Derek Carr tells you that they are intending to try to compete as best as they can, and all those other things. We'll see what other things happen during the offseason, right? Actions speak louder than words in these types of situations. But as of right now, all indications are that this is going to be a team that competes. And we can disagree with that all that we want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we disagree with it because it's what they're doing. So with that being the case and recalibrating thought to what it is that they're doing as opposed to what we think they should do, a Davante Adams pursuit makes sense for this team. And I will tell you, as far as I understand it, there will be at least some interest, right? Keith Williams, the New Orleans Saints wide receiver coach, works with Davante Adams constantly and has over the course of off seasons, all those other things. They work together at Fresno State. Of course, Derek Carr and Davante Adams, former Fresno State teammates, former Las Vegas Raiders teammates as well. And of course, the Saints were on Davante Adams' preferred landing spot list along with the New York Jets last season before he was moved from the Raiders to the Jets. And now the expectation with him hitting the open market is that he's now going to have the opportunity to go out there and try to find his next landing spot, which is good for Davante Adams, who's entering his age 34 season, looking to find a place where he can go and at least finish his career in a competitive style. And everyone kind of believes that, well, I'm going to spoil this a little bit. Not everyone. Some, most, many believe that Davante Adams is just going to go and mindlessly follow Aaron Rodgers wherever it is that he goes. And that may very well be the case. But if I'm Davante Adams, I'm pretty aware of Aaron Rodgers' limitations at this point in his career. Aaron Rodgers is no longer the Aaron Rodgers of 3-4 years ago. If we believe what our eyes are telling us, he won't be that guy again. So is it really more of a competitive advantage to follow Aaron Rodgers to the New York Giants, for instance, just operating a full hypothetical there, or potentially joining up with a former quarterback of yours in a different place with the New Orleans Saints, who at least operate in a weak division and at least are in a situation to where they look like they want to go out there and compete. Again, we'll see what the actions actually tell us. But if the Saints do indeed actually want to go out there and compete in 2025, this is a signing that makes sense. Now, Ross, how do they get that done when they're $40+ million over the salary cap? Well, they do it the same way that they signed Chase Young last year when they started the offseason, $70 million over the salary cap. The same way that they signed Derek Carr 2 years ago when they were $100 million over the salary cap or whatever that year was. This is something that the Saints do every year, right? It's always that gift from Breaking Bad of the dude yelling like they can't keep getting away with this, and they continue to get away with it. And that's fine. Like, if that's what it is that the New Orleans Saints are going to do, they might as well pump those resources into a signing that actually ends up allowing them to be able to go out there and do what it is that they want to do, which is compete. And Davante Adams is exactly the style of wide receiver that the New Orleans Saints need on their offense. He can be a guy that forces the defense to game plan towards him, that forces the defense to focus on him, opens up the game for the other speed options and guys like Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Basically, what you'd be adding is exactly what you need in a Davante Adams. And a Davante Adams that can still stay out on the field, that is able to get out there and produce. Still went over 1,000 yards last season, even though it was a lower season for him. But still went out over 1,000 yards last season. Came in with 80+ catches or whatever it was. I mean, the guy still has what it is that you want from him. Good route runner, like all the things that don't age in a football player or in a wide receiver. Solid blocker, good contributor, good leader, good personality guy, good mentor for some of your young wideouts as well. I don't look at him genuinely as a guy that would be a bad fit or a bad signing for New Orleans. The only thing that would come down to is how much did you pay for him? Because if we're being honest, you give this team the opportunity to go out there and trade for him. That's one thing. But if you get the opportunity to go out there and just sign him to where you have full control over what a deal would look like, as opposed to trading for him where you inherit the deal that you trade for, then I think that changes your perspective around how you acquire a player like Davante Adams that can come in, even if just for a year or maybe even a 2-year deal, but probably just a year, kind of like the Chase Young signing. Could be one that comes in on a veteran minimum in terms of base salary, but gets a little bit of a signing bonus and has a bunch of incentives tied to the deal for production, playing time, things like that. Like, there's a lot of ways to kind of make all of this work and maneuver it in such a way that you don't shoot yourselves in the foot. They did a good job with that last year with the Chase Young contract. Now, Chase Young went out there and played every single game, earned every single incentive and everything like that. So great for Chase. And that means the New Orleans Saints now have to pay all of that off, but that's fine because you got what it is that you wanted from him. You didn't get the sacks, but you got the pressures, you got the player, you got what it is that you wanted, and you got 17 games out of him, which is great for New Orleans. And you come off of a season for Davante Adams, even though he changed teams and operated with poor quarterback play all season, 85 receptions, 1,063 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. That would have led the team for the New Orleans Saints in every category. He also played 14 games last season. The only games that he missed were because of his hamstring injury, which was, suspiciously set in right before the Raiders traded him away, and then was suspiciously better immediately after he arrived in New York. So sometimes a change of scenery, maybe it was a change of altitude or just needed a little bit more humidity, whatever it was, it all loosened up, right? And it was all fine for him. But that's it. So the other thing is, like, the other argument against this that I completely understand is, well, the team should be wanting to get younger. Again, that's an idea of what we think they should be doing. I agree. I think they should be focused on getting younger as well. So I hope that they use all 9 of those draft picks, or even go so far as to try to accumulate an additional one if they can. I think they should use all of those draft picks. The Saints, since 2000 or I can't remember what year it was, but over the recent past, the Saints have spent the fewest draft picks of any team in the NFL. So I think that should change. And so I think you can get younger, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't go out there and invest in a good player and go out there and get a proven veteran, a proven commodity to handle one of your biggest needs. And we can say again that we want the New Orleans Saints to want to get younger. That doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. And so if they're going to go out there and try to make a veteran signing to handle a big time position of need, which is that position at wide receiver, Davante Adams is a really, really good option. The question is, can you get him on the contract that works for you? Which is a little bit more doable now that he's an open market free agent, who, by the way, does not impact your compensatory pick formula because he was cut by the team. His contract was terminated rather than him being able to have a contract expire. So he would not count against your compensatory pick formula. If you're going to go out there and try to make a move, Davante Adams is a guy that does make sense. And with the ties in New Orleans, if the contract is right and with the situation being what it is, that the Saints want to compete, it makes sense. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints terminated the contract of Jamal Williams, New Orleans Saints running back. Not a surprise move. We knew that was coming, but I think what it shows you is that a new running back addition is certainly on the way this offseason. We'll take a look at options as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Chewy. I am a longtime pet owner, and Chewy has been clutch in multiple scenarios for me, not just because they get you some of those brands that you know and love for your pet over at chewy.com, but because they also help you out with a bunch of other stuff too, including even pet health. They have a bunch of different things, including 100,000 products, but some of the stuff that I even like more, prescriptions, they help you out with that. Telehealth vet visits. They even have in-person vet clinics that are rolling out nationwide as well. And with the auto ship feature, which is an absolute game changer, make sure that you're all set up for deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials that you need so that you never run out, auto booked and sent directly to you that you can change and cancel any time. Chewy has everything that you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now you can get $20 off of your first order and free shipping by heading over to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. That's $20 off and free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase is required. New customers only. Terms and conditions do apply. See site for complete details. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have cut ties with running back Jamal Williams, and I think that is a clear indication that running back will be a position addressed this offseason and absolutely should be one that's addressed in April's upcoming NFL draft. I want to dive into a couple different things here. We'll take a look at the additions that could potentially be had in the draft. We'll take a look at what this move means salary cap wise, but I want to start off with why this move happened. Jamal Williams came to New Orleans in 2023 as a free agent after leading the NFL with 17 rushing touchdowns in his final year with the Detroit Lions. He called his contract negotiations with the Detroit Lions that year before he signed with the New Orleans Saints as disrespectful. My understanding, people that I've talked to around that over the course of the years, kind of comes down to them basically like negotiating with Jamal Williams, but then also negotiating with somebody else actively at the same time, and then effectively using those other negotiations as a leverage against him, even though he was the incumbent guy, saying, well, we could sign this guy for that, so either take this or go. And that was kind of it. And so my understanding is that that's kind of what led to Jamal Williams walking away from the Detroit Lions and ended up in New Orleans. And in New Orleans, 2 touchdowns in 2 years. And look, a lot of people hold that against Jamal Williams, but I think a lot of that is also all about the New Orleans Saints. They never put that guy in a position to succeed here in New Orleans. Let's just call it what it is. Didn't run him between the tackles, didn't use him in short yardage situations, averaged 3.1 yards per carry during his time here in New Orleans. It wasn't a great look, and it wasn't a great marriage between the two. So we knew for a long time that this was going to be a split. This is probably mutual too. And so we'll see where Jamal Williams lands in his future. But that's kind of what led to this. Like the usage, the lack of production, there's something on both sides of this that just did not work here in New Orleans. He was not given the opportunities to succeed doing the things that he succeeded doing in 2022 that led to the New Orleans Saints being interested in him in the first place. And also, when he was given opportunities, he wasn't able to maximize those opportunities. He was a bad scheme fit for Clint Kubiak, who instead of balancing with the use of the zone run, leaned all the way into the zone run, doing so at almost 70%, leading the NFL in those outside the tackles runs at over 70%. I mean, it just wasn't an offense that had a counterpunch. And that's what Jamal Williams could have been, was the counterpunch, but that's not the way that they utilize it. And the idea was effectively to have him come in and be another Mark Ingram type, right? That could run between the tackles, that can do all these other things, be a little bit of a workhorse, let Alvin Kamara be the in-space guy, but they never really put Jamal Williams in those situations. And in the times that he was in those situations, didn't often have the opportunity to capitalize on them. So Jamal Williams will find a new home for 2025. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints save a little bit of cap space and now are certainly entering that running back market, because I don't think that there's enough on this roster right now when it comes to that position to really make you feel comfortable if you're the New Orleans Saints heading into 2025. So what they save, the kind of impact of this contract termination, is $1.59 million. Not a lot, but an amount that we knew was going to be enough for them to be willing to split. The fact that they save anything at all on contracts at this point with terminations are things that you want to take advantage of when you have those opportunities. And so I think that this shows you too, in terms of further impact beyond just the salary cap, that the New Orleans Saints don't have loyalties right now. And we talked about that before when it came to like some of the news around Tyrann Mathieu and the considerations around potentially cutting him, which doesn't feel like that holds any water or any weight at all. We'll see how things go, but feels more like those two would come together and say, okay, how do we get you here for another year, but reduce your salary cap? Kind of like what they did last year. I would expect a similar approach with DeMario Davis. These are the days, by the way, the coming days, coming weeks, are certainly the days where that's going to be the case moving forward. So, these are the days where we're going to start to see the Saints doing all their salary cap maneuvering and all those other things. So do keep an eye out for that. And we'll keep you up to date here on the show too, of course. But I expect that that's the way that they'll go with all that. But I think beyond that, like, you're just not in a situation here with a new head coach, a new defensive coordinator, new offensive play caller, even a new special teams coach, even though it's an incumbent special teams coach in Phil Galliano. There's just not loyalties here. There's no love lost in between all of this when you have to make tough decisions. It's back to being a business for the New Orleans Saints. And I think that that's something that guys should keep an eye out on, right? Like, you look at some players that could save a considerable amount of money if moved on from. They would be disappointing names for some people, but the New Orleans Saints don't owe anybody anything right now in terms of trying to undergo and find their future and what their next era looks like. So I think this is an illustration of exactly that as well. Okay, so where do the Saints go from here at the position? Why is it that we feel that this move means running back is certainly something that's in the books? I think a big part of it just comes down to the question marks at the position behind Alvin Kamara. You have Jordan Mims, who came in as an undrafted free agent, spent time in Buffalo, came over to New Orleans, waited patiently on the practice squad, got some opportunities on the field, but overall is still an unknown player, right? He hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities on the field, hasn't been somebody that comes in with, a track record from another team or anything like that. Like, it's still a question mark when it comes to that. Kendre Miller, still a question mark. Injuries, all those other things obviously are a big part of his narrative. And so do you really know what you're going to get from him? Not yet. Do you know that you're going to get him at all on the field? Not yet, right? And how much can you really rely on that? And then the next ones that you're looking at are going to be guys like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who it's awesome that he's back in New Orleans, but he still has to, he's brought back on a 1-year deal. He's got to make the roster. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a foregone conclusion. I think he will, and I think that he can. But I think New Orleans is understandably going to play that situation out and the rest of this running back situation out with go out there and prove it, for each of these guys. And I think Xavier Valade is another one that comes in as a reserve future contract guy, a guy that I like a lot, a guy that wants to get involved in the community, is just like a good dude, all those other things. That's all great. But what's the opportunity going to look like? How will he be able to earn snaps? Will he be able to earn snaps if he gets those opportunities? All those other things. Question marks, question marks, question marks. Nothing is answerable. Nothing is solid behind Alvin Kamara at the position. That's not to say that it's bad after Alvin Kamara. That's not to say that the players don't have talent or anything like that. It's just there are more questions than answers when it comes to everyone behind Alvin Kamara. So if you get an opportunity to go out there and grab somebody that's maybe a little bit less of a question mark, go out there and grab somebody that's coming in with big momentum coming through the draft or something like that, then I think that there's an opportunity for you to do that. And you should take that opportunity if you're the New Orleans Saints. Competition breeds excellence. Bring in more competition and foster that competition, foster the development of other players, foster the development of your new faces, all those other things. I think that is what the New Orleans Saints should do. I think that is what they will do at running back. And in this year's running back class in the NFL draft, you got to take a swing at it. You got to take a swing at it. It could be round 1 and Ashton Jeanty coming out of Boise State. It could be round 2 with Cam Scadaboo out of Arizona, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, Quinshon Judkins maybe in the 3rd. You could look at a guy like RJ Harvey out of UCF, out of Central Florida. You could look at DJ Giddens, who's one of my favorite running backs in this class coming out of Kansas State. Like, there is so much talent. I didn't even mention Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina or Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. And those are just some of the draftable guys in the first 2 days of the draft. And there's so much more late. Jordan James out of Oregon. Like, there's a bunch of these guys that are all starter potential It's a very deep class, and the New Orleans Saints should 100% be taking a swing at it, so that if at the very least, you can start to get some answers rather than building up nothing but questions at the position so far. Coming up next, let's dive into the New Orleans Saints' new coaching staff additions. The Saints aren't just hiring coaches, they're restructuring the way their staff works, and I think they're stacking some W's along the way. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints aren't just hiring new coaches, they're restructuring the way their staff operates. And I think it's a big time win for the New Orleans Saints. I got three things that I want to highlight, three W's, if you will, in terms of what I think the New Orleans Saints coaching staff restructures and hires are excelling in so far. The most important one I'd like to highlight over on the defensive staff side. The New Orleans Saints are going to end up, it sounds like, splitting safety coach and cornerbacks coach instead of having a defensive backs coach. And I think that's a wise move for two reasons. One, it's a modern day approach to the way that you could do this. It's the way that you approach it in college. It's a way to end up kind of making things more finite and translatable for each of your positions, as opposed to one guy having to say, okay, this is for the corners, this is for the safeties, yada, yada. You have one guy that's focused on safeties, one guy that's focused on corners, and then you added Terry Joseph as a defensive passing game coordinator. I think that helps you a lot there too. So I would expect Robert Blanton, who just joined from the it's Miami of Ohio, coming over from there as the guy to be the safeties coach, and then veteran coach that I love in Grady Brown. What a hire. Bringing him over from 4 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers, spent a lot of time as well with a lot of collegiate teams and everything like that, had earlier career opportunities in the NFL too. He will probably focus on the cornerbacks if I'm guesstimating a little bit here, just based on their track record, what they've done in previous stops, all that. This replicates the coaching staff that Brandon Staley had as a defensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Rams and changes what the New Orleans Saints have done for a long time. So again, change. New ideas, new approaches, new structure, all that. That I think is really important. One of the things that you always have to be concerned about sometimes when it comes to organizations doing coaching changes and things like that is that sometimes, and I'm not saying that, what I'm saying is that the New Orleans Saints aren't doing this, but that there are times that there are teams that go out there, hire a new coach, hire new coordinators, whatever, and say, okay, we're hiring you to do this, which is the prescription of how we run this team. And that's fine in some cases when you have something that you know works, all those other things. I think the New Orleans Saints learned that approach doesn't work, right? Like they tried to maintain Dennis Allen, they tried to maintain or retain Dennis Allen, they retained Pete Carmichael and tried to maintain the Sean Payton approach, found out that that didn't work. And then so now they've changed their entire approach in terms of how it is that they build out their staff, not just with the way that the schemes are headed, but in the way that even everything is taught. And I think this gives you an early glimpse of that just based on staff structure. The extra piece of that, so this is still point number one in terms of the way that they've reorganized their defensive staff, is that now you're also looking at the potential with another pair of hires to see the New Orleans Saints end up having an outside linebackers coach and an inside linebackers coach, or an outside linebackers coach and a linebackers coach. I don't know how they're going to designate it position-wise, but with the additions of two separate linebacker coach backgrounds, I think that that's another one where you look at, okay, they're splitting it up and they're going to translate this scheme immediately to the player based on their focus position as opposed to an overall position of linebacker coach. And I think that gives you an indication of a further step towards a 3-4 heavier defense, which is what we've expected for a little while here. So I think both of those things show you defensive change and structure in the coaching staff should translate to an entirely new approach on defense, which is great news for the New Orleans Saints, whose approach on defense hasn't worked for the past couple of years. And so making a change, much better than not making a change. It's like I said when they hired Brandon Staley, you'd much rather watch this team go out and try something new and fail than try to do the same thing again and fail, right? If you're trying something new and it doesn't work out, at least you tried something new. And I think that's to credit to the New Orleans Saints in terms of their defensive coaching staff hires, and more importantly, defensive coaching staff structure adjustments that I think end up kind of showing you a bit of that. Okay, number two former head coaches now on the staff. Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator, and then now Scott Linehan has joined as, I don't think we know the title yet, if I had to take an early swing at it, and this is probably a swing and a miss, but if I had to take an early swing at it, maybe senior offensive assistant or something like that. That's a position that Rick Dennison held, before he left to go and rejoin Clint Kubiak and the Pacific Northwest New Orleans Saints offensive coaching staff up there with the Seattle Seahawks, which like literally is almost that entire New Orleans Saints staff just moved over to Seattle. It's kind of funny. I love the fact that some team out there was like, yeah, I want that staff exactly here with my team. So we'll see. Maybe it works out for them in a way that it didn't work out for the New Orleans Saints, but it is interesting to see nonetheless. So why is the Scott Linehan hire something that I like? I love having the ex-head coach kind of demeanor, ex-head coach leadership or guidance for your first-time head coach. I think this is an example of Kellen Moore twice over saying, I am aware of the fact that this is my first time doing this, and so I want to bring in all the help that I can get. You'd rather a guy come in and say, let me preempt the help that I'm going to need than push the need, not acknowledge that the need might be there. And I think sometimes you see coaches come in and get stubborn and say no. There are some coaches out there that you hear stories about where like as things begin to slip away and become more challenging, they try to grab and take control of more and more and more. Oh, that's not working. Let me take control of it. Oh, that's not working. Let me take control of it. And then that ends up just kind of toppling over eventually like a badly constructed Jenga tower. Shout out to a Jenga reference, dub. And it all comes down to the fact that they didn't delegate, or they didn't share responsibilities, or they didn't admit, hey, I'm weak here. Let me bring somebody in that's strong there and build that toolbox like we talked about a couple weeks ago, right? Like toolboxes are good because of the amount of different tools you can carry in them. If you have a toolbox full of nothing but hammers, you're probably pretty screwed when you need to do something around the house, no pun intended. And so I'm on bars today. Like I'm killing this. And so that to me is something I think you're seeing Kellen Moore do early, right? Say, you know what? This is my first time as a head coach. There might be some places where I'm deficient that I don't know yet. Let me bring in guys that have been there before and that have either succeeded or failed at it before so that they can help me understand where I need to go, what I should do, what can I try, what are some alternatives, help me, give me other ideas, all these other things. I think it's great to have many voices in the room. I think Kellen Moore has opened his door to many voices. And then the third W for me are the moves that they didn't make. The things that they didn't change. Them not going out and hiring John Gruden, great choice. You're a team right now that is in the midst of a restructure, reformat, whatever it is, right, that you want to call it. Adding controversy and distraction to your already convoluted or at least somewhat complicated trajectory. Or let's call it uncertain trajectory, I think is probably more appropriate because everything's new. It was a wise choice. That was a wise choice to not go through that. Now, I say that, now watch John Gruden get hired to some position at some point. But I thought not hiring him as an offensive coordinator, not hiring him as a head coach was a good choice. I guess that's the big thing. I also love the retention of the guys that they kept around. I love that they kept Keith Williams around. You give Chris Olave his guy. I love that they brought Joel Thomas back. You give Alvin Kamara his guy back. Right? And you end up finding success in a run-heavy offense, working with both of those guys because Keith Williams is all about no block, no route. Joel Thomas is all about committee approach to the running back position and how to maximize Alvin Kamara's talents. I love those types of moves. I think bringing Brendan Nugent back was smart. I like the things that they did that were either based on bringing back familiar faces, retaining a familiar face in Keith Williams, and of course, the idea of like the swing that they didn't take. And sometimes you swing, you don't swing, you don't hit a home run. Other times you don't swing and you strike out and you swing again later and you do. And I think that was a place where like not taking the swing, wise choice by the New Orleans Saints. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I'm going to continue the kind of free agency theme here. We took a look at one free agent that could check the box for the New Orleans Saints at wide receiver. Let's take a look at the alternatives. If the New Orleans Saints don't sign Davante Adams, do they have alternatives in free agency? Spoiler alert, the class is not strong. So we'll dive into that in tomorrow's episode, as well as get you more breaking news as things continue on with the New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you very much. for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.